Okay, folks, if I could have everyone's attention, we'll go ahead and get started with our meeting today. I'm going to ask one of our Vice Presidents, John Mitchner, if he would come up and lead us in a prayer. And I'll ask David Swafford, retired captain, United States, I almost said Army, I'm so sorry, David. Navy. Lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. So, John, if you could come up, please.
Oh Lord our God, we come humbly before you, realizing that everything we have and that we are is dependent solely upon you. We are thankful for everything that you've given to us. And Lord, we ask that you continue to open our eyes and to teach us every day your truths, the truths that we find in the Word and in your creation. Help us to live by what is right so that we can bring joy to ourselves and peace to the world. Help us to find opportunities to bless others with your truth and with your love. This we pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Salute. Pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I want to remind everybody that we are filming these programs today. I asked Dr. Shadid if he would be willing to have this filmed and put up on YouTube, and he's very willing to do that. I appreciate his willingness to do so. We would give any candidate the choice either way, and when we get to our legislative interviews later this year, we will not be filming those. Those will not be going up on email. I want to remind everybody that we now have another microphone over here. So if you have questions, if you can quietly slip around the back and come and line up for this microphone over here. We want to do this so there's a soundtrack with the video that will be going out, and that's the purpose of that. Just a couple more things here. Everyone's dues expired at 12:01 January 1st. So if you've not renewed your dues, unless you're one of those that were drafting your checking account on a monthly basis, you'll need to renew your membership, and it won't be long before we'll be voting. We'll be interviewing all candidates for statewide races and congressional races prior to filing date. Because once filing date is here, all of our time is then taken up with legislative races to interview candidates for the state legislature. So I urge you to sign up, become a member as soon as possible. As of last Wednesday, I think we already had 82 members so far this year. So that's a tremendous response. A lot of those coming from people signing up here, many of them from the mail, and then some of them, of course, are reoccurring because of contributing on a monthly basis through our drafting of your checking account. Next week, we'll have U.S. Congressman James Langford here. And I had a lengthy conversation with Congressman Langford about shortly after his budget vote. I expressed to him my disappointment in that with some reasons. And he has his reasons why he did that. One of the things I've always appreciated about James is he is always willing to give an answer for what he does. Now, we may or may not, as individuals, like that answer, but I appreciate the courage that he has to come before a group that might be disappointed with him. And there will be people here that will be very pleased with him. I'm sure that's the case. One of the things that we do at Oak Pack is we practice free speech. A lot of people say they believe in it, but they don't really practice it. We actually believe in it and practice it here. And that's the reason on this table over here, on this end, people can put anything they want there. That's not anything endorsed by Oak Pack. The other materials are for your education and benefit and to educate other people with that. So I would urge you to view and access all of these items here. I'm going to go ahead now, and again, the membership forms are on our table down there. I'm going to go ahead now and begin with our meeting, and our speaker today is Oklahoma City Councilman Ed Shadid. I will tell you this, that I endorsed Ed when in his runoff election, I guess 2 years ago now, when you were running for city council. I believed Ed to be a liberal at that time, but with the defeat of Brian Walters, I did not believe that there was going to be anyone on the council that would ask the difficult questions and actually try to do what I call due diligence, to really find out what's going on and challenge maybe the herd mentality that might be directing city government. And that's why I endorsed him. I thought it was important to have in any governing body at least one person on a governing body that's not going to be just a rubber stamp yes man for, say, a city manager, a school superintendent, a city, some type of a deal like that. And that's the reason I endorsed Ed. I was real disappointed when he introduced the anti-sexual discrimination ordinance on the city council. But I understand he has the largest number of homosexuals in his district, of any district in the city probably. And if his philosophy of leadership is to do the bidding of the people in his district, as opposed to a leadership where I know what is right, I'm going to do what is right, and I'm going to sell the ideas of what is right to my citizens. Those are two contrasting differences in leadership. And if it is to do the bidding of your people, then he did the right thing in doing it. If you're angry about that, and you don't like that, I don't, you have to ask, well, why did all these other so-called supposed Christians on the council vote for that thing? Two did not. Larry Maggie did not, and the previous, the black gentleman that represented Skip Kelly did not vote for that. But anyway, now we're down to a race for mayor. And one of the things that I believe is, and through my observations, is when you find somebody that's in a position to go against the grain of the powers to be in Oklahoma City, sometimes you're going to be attacked pretty vigorously in Oklahoma, and that's just an opinion of mine. And so it's very important that you do not give ammunition to your opponents, because they will find it and they will use it against you. And Ed has some dirty laundry. If you have you read the Oklahoman, then most of that's been aired out. But all of us do, probably in one measure or another. And at times in our life, we've really made some foolish decisions and such as that. But regardless, I'm very thankful he's come here today to give his side of the story that won't be filtered through my voice or the Oklahomans or anyone else. He's come here today to give his own reasons for why he's running for office, his own reasons for the stands that he takes, and the things that are going on in his campaign, as well as the petition drives that he's involved with. I think he's involved with them. So at this point in time, would you please welcome Dr. Ed Shadid, Oklahoma City Council. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that it is very important. There we go. It's very important to have a thorough discussion, a well-contested mayoral election, which we really haven't had in about a decade. There's a lot of issues that need to be talked about. I'm happy to come here today, and I'm very grateful that you've invited me. I wish the mayor was here. And let me just publicly call for one more time for us to have public debates. Just as they had 3 in Tulsa, we should have televised public debates to talk about the issues facing the people of Oklahoma City. We've tried and tried and tried, and the mayor refuses. He does everything he can to have us speak separately. So until that time, hopefully public pressure will come and we'll have those kind of public debates. Until that time, I'm grateful that you've had me here today. I hope that you have him. And at least that we get to have, that you get to hear from both sides about the issues facing Oklahoma City. People are like, oh my, wow, you're speaking at OPAC, there's, the world's turned upside down. What I like about city politics is that they're nonpartisan, there's no political parties, and a lot of the labels that are used to divide us and to try and put us into boxes start to fall apart at the city level. Liberal, conservative, Democrat, Republican, Libertarian, whatever. They start to fall apart at the city level, and that becomes confusing to people. And so you see Democrats supporting Mick, and you see Republicans supporting us, and you see all kinds of interesting coalitions coming together. And I think I think the reason for that is that at the city level, other than maybe the issue that Charlie brought up, a lot of the social issues that come into play in politics at the state and federal level don't really play out at the local level, right? So politics gets decreased to its lowest common denominator, to its most fundamental phase, which is economic power, which is the dispersal of economic resources when there's not enough of those resources to do everything that we'd like to spend money on. And how are those priorities decided? Who decides those priorities? How many people decide those priorities? With what degree of transparency? With what degree of debate? That's really what's at play at the city level. And so that's why you get these interesting coalitions, because now it becomes really much more, I think, about concentration of power versus dispersal of power. And if I can break down the most basic reason why I'm running, is that I believe that since I was a child in this city, throughout my life, and currently, there has been too much concentrated power in the way decisions are made in Oklahoma City. And I want to disperse that decision-making power. I want much more transparency, and I want much more public vetting of city projects before they go to a vote of the people and after they've been voted by the people. I want to change the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of appointments that are made by the mayor to 75 different boards, trusts, and commissions. Which really, if you read Charlie's email, I understand his concerns. Those boards are really economic, by and large, economic in character. There's a fairgrounds board that has a constant stream, has more than half of the hotel motel tax goes to the fairgrounds. The airport trust, which ran a $52 million surplus last year, small numbers of people deciding how this money is going to be spent, right? All appointed by the mayor. And deciding how your taxpayer dollars are going to be spent. The appointments that I would make would have significant diversity of political thought. You would see people all across the political spectrum. But the common denominator that they would have is they would have to look me in the eye and they would say, I will be a taxpayer watchdog. I will get in there and I will find ways to improve operational efficiency. I will look for misappropriation of taxpayer funds. Not that there's necessarily wrongdoing, but if you audit any company in Oklahoma City, right, you're going to find some operational efficiencies that you can capture. And in some cases, you might find wrongdoing, you might find questionable expenditures. We have to have all of those boards, trusts, and commissions very, very open, with multiple people, because there's safety in numbers, appointed to all those 75 boards, trusts, and commissions who are committed to maximum openness, transparency, and protecting the taxpayer dollars. That's a significant difference between myself and the current mayor. And so dispersing that power. Now I want to talk a little bit about this petition and the convention center project. There's a lot that needs to talk about, but I think that particular project weaves into a cohesive narrative so much of what I think can be improved in Oklahoma City governance, in our decision making. When I grew up, again, I heard, and the messages that we hear as children are powerful, right? Especially if when you become an adult, you get more and more evidence that reinforces them. But I was told that, I kept hearing messages that at City Hall, or basically you can't fight City Hall, is the message I got, is that there's a small number of people who are deciding the city's priorities, who are deciding how our money is spent, and that you really can't resist that. And then there's a newspaper, this is before the internet, the Oklahoman, who really controlled the flow of information and really manipulated public opinion for its particular goals. The Oklahoman wasn't choosing sides, the Oklahoman was the side. The Oklahoman was the power. And so those are the messages that I heard, and that many of you, I'm sure, heard similar. We all instinctively know what Good Old Boy Network means and and how that's decided. When I was young, my uncle, who I think a couple of you were asking me about before as we were walking in, had a theater called the Criterion Theater. Does anybody remember the Criterion Theater? Okay, so the Criterion Theater would be a crown jewel today. It was when they had movies, and they used to have a symphony in the front, and it was elaborate, and if we had that today, it would be one of our crown jewels of downtown. And so the city decided that a small number of people who, not necessarily, I mean, they may or may not have been wanting to line their own pockets, they may or may not have had nefarious or ill intent, they may have thought that they were doing what was best for the city. But they believed in this urban renewal philosophy, which is that we tear down, sometimes seize, government seizes private property, tears it down, gives it to other developers and private property owners, and then tries to build it back up. That was their philosophy. That was the strategy, right? So my uncle resisted, and he fought all the way to the Supreme Court, and he lost. And the government, the city of Oklahoma City, seized the Criterion Theater and tore it down, and then built the Century Plaza, which sat empty for the next 40 years. And they tore down 1,000 other buildings, right? And it didn't work. The small number of people deciding the city's priorities and the city's strategy were wrong. And that is the fundamental risk of too concentrated of power, is that they might be doing what they think is best for the city. But what if they're wrong? Then all of us suffer the consequences. And you're always going to be safer if you disperse that power and you have more diversity of political thought and more diversity of experience and more diversity of people in the room deciding the city's priorities. That's always going to be a safer strategy. Either side, concentrated power or dispersed power, may get it right or wrong, but I think you're safer with dispersed power. So, just on that, while I'm on that, I think it is always wrong to seize private property and give it to another private property owner. That does not make sense to me. And our family suffered from it, and the city suffered from it. And in the first maps, they seized property from Moshe Tal, decided that he wasn't an adequate developer, gave it to another developer that they felt was better, and then built very sophisticated architecture like Toby Keith's Bar and Grill. Right?
Yeah.
Anybody could have built Toby Keith's Bar and Grill, including Moshe Tal. So government has no business seizing private property and giving it to somebody else who they deem a better private property owner. But let's trace back to just a little bit of history on this convention center project, because I think that this is the modern day example of something like the Criterion Theater, where you have a small number of people who have decided what the city's priorities should be. And if they're wrong, there's significant risk for us. So in 2008, late 2008, Mick Cornett approaches the city attorney and says, I have a job offer at the largest advertising firm in the city, Ackerman McQueen. And I'd like to know if I can take this executive vice president job, right? And the city attorney says, well, you can, but there is some risk. They have two significant clients. One is the fairgrounds, right, which has some of the most powerful people on the board, Clay Bennett, Ron Norick, others, right, and does a lot of business. The other client that Ackerman McQueen has is the Chamber of Commerce. And so, for you to be the mayor of Oklahoma City and be executive vice president of the largest advertising firm that has the Chamber of Commerce and the fairgrounds as clients, there's some risk there, and you need to be very, very careful. A few months later, a study comes out for our police manpower, and it says, you have significant deficiencies in the number of police that you have in your city. You're about 250, 300 officers down. You have the same number of police officers as you had 15 years ago with 150,000 more people spread out over a much greater area. What are you doing? You don't have enough police to do all the investigations that need to be done. You're running your staffing at all 4 divisions at minimum staffing. Your police officers are getting burned out. Manpower is at risk, and you've got to do something. The mayor walked out of the presentation halfway through it, talked to the cameras and said, well, there's some operational efficiencies we can capture. Lied. Did not talk about the deficiencies of 250 to 300 officers. And then the rest of 2009 refused to meet with the police, who were beginning to justifiably get panicked that you're moving towards this MAPS sales tax and you won't meet with us. You won't talk with us about you're going to build $800 million worth of capital projects. There's no money for the operations of those projects. And how are we ever going to meet this deficiency of 250 to 300 officers? But Mick Cornett wouldn't meet with them. And so it led to a strain over the year. So about the same time, March of 2009, the Chamber of Commerce comes out with a study about their convention center project by a company called Convention Sports and Leisure. And there's one story in the Oklahoman in March of 2009. Did one before in 2007, and that's it from the Oklahoman, about that study and about the public subsidies that would be required for a convention center hotel, which are outlined in that study. And to this day, that study has not been released to the public. I've been asking for it for years now. I've spent a lot of my own money taking out advertisements in newspapers asking them to release it to the public, and they won't. I introduced a resolution on December 31st asking the council to ask the chamber to release that to the public. It was voted down 6-3. They will not release this study, which outlines the blueprint of where we're going, where this small concentrated power wants us to go with this complex. And basically what it outlined is that for us to go to the next tier of convention business, we need to do a phase 1 convention center, which is 285,000 square feet, and we need to attach it to about a 650-room convention center hotel. A convention center hotel is not like a normal hotel. It's a hybrid between a convention center and a hotel. The first few floors are meeting room space, right? So it's like a convention center at the bottom and then a hotel at the top. And meeting room space doesn't generate revenue the same way that hotel rooms do. So many of these have lost money in cities across the city, and they represent significant risk. And Wall Street has really soured on them. Okay? So in the study it says, in the last 5 years, no city's been able to get one of these hotels built without massive public subsidies. Then the study goes on to recommend a phase 2 expansion to bring the total number of square footage up to 425,000 square feet for another $150 million, right? And then it gives some warnings. It says there are some problems, some obstacles that you'll have to overcome as a city. Number one, you don't have enough direct flights to Oklahoma City. And people really don't like, in this day and age, to transfer. They don't like to go to Dallas and then Oklahoma City. They don't like to go to Chicago and then Oklahoma City. If they were going to do that, they'd just have their convention in Dallas or in Chicago or in San Antonio or in Austin or in Kansas City. So that'll be a problem for you. Number two, you've got some really difficult weather for a number of months during the year. Number three, you're one of the only cities that doesn't have public transit to and from your airport. And you don't have public transit in the evenings or on weekends. Number four, you don't have adequate city infrastructure like sidewalks and some other infrastructure around the convention center. And these will all be obstacles that you'll need to overcome, in addition to making this massive convention center investment. And this is what they don't want you to see, in my opinion. This is what you need to see, in my opinion. And what no newspaper organization, no media organization, no organization whatsoever has demanded that they release to us to let us process as we contemplate spending hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars. So that was released in March of 2009 and then not discussed further. We get to the MAPS 3 campaign and they have a problem. The convention center is polling at about 25% approval and 57% opposed, and if you split the undecideds, you're looking at maybe something like 65% opposition. So the convention center by itself is probably not going to pass a vote of the people by itself. So you've got to package it with 7 other projects and basically engage in with the equivalent of political log rolling, where you tell the people up or down on these 8 projects. But if you mention the convention center hotel, which is going to require massive public subsidies, if not complete ownership by the city, the whole thing may go down. So Mick Cornett doesn't. He doesn't mention it, and neither does the Oklahoman. And so we have a Maps 3 website that has 2 sentences about the convention center and what this $250 million project, which actually is going to be hundreds of millions more, 2 sentences about what this is entailed. The Chamber has a series of 3 luncheons called Breaking Through Luncheons. And the grand total of the amount of time that Mick Cornett spends explaining this project and all the risk and all this history is 2.5 minutes, right? I've been speaking to you I don't know how many minutes, right? And we haven't even started to scratch the surface. He spends 2.5 minutes explaining this project to the people of Oklahoma City. And what he says is that if you will vote for Maps 3 and $250 million for a convention center, we'll triple the economic impact to the city. It'll be an economic development tool. Even though no city in America has ever doubled, much less tripled, the economic impact from building a new convention center or a convention center expansion. But he promises us that if you vote for this $250 million convention center, you'll triple the economic impact. Not mentioning that the number he's getting this from, tripling the economic impact, assumes a 650-room hotel is going to be next to it. And he doesn't mention that there's no money in there for parking, which some estimates now are another $50 million. The finance department is concerned because there's really only 2 pathways that cities can go down to get these deals done. Because the private sector won't touch them by themselves anymore, right? So you have two ways you can do it. One is that the city can put a whole bunch of money towards the construction costs, perhaps more than half of it. And then it says, you know, we're putting all this money into the construction costs, and then you, the private company, are on your own. So this is what Nashville, Tennessee just did. They gave $128 million towards the construction costs, and then they had 2/3 of the property tax abated for the next 20 years. And then they told Omni Hotels, all right, you're on your own. The taxpayers have given you a huge push, and if the hotel does well, you make money, and if it loses money, you lose money, but the taxpayers are off the hook. We've spent all this money and we're done. And so that's one way you can do it. So people in the finance department went to Mick Cornett and said, there's only 2 ways you can do it. Maybe we should put some Maps 3 dollars towards the hotel, because if we don't, we're not going to have another bond for 5 years. There is no $128 million lying around. So if we don't talk about it now, we're going to have to go down the other pathway. Well, Mick Cornett wouldn't listen to them, or the powers that are pulling his puppet strings wouldn't listen, right? So that pathway went away. And now we're left with the only other pathway, which is to borrow money, revenue bonds. The IRS doesn't allow cities to borrow money for a for-profit endeavor like a hotel, so you have to have a nonprofit or one of the city's trusts issue revenue bonds, right? Now we're estimating the cost of the hotel to be $200 million. So we're talking about as much as $200 million in revenue bonds, which by the time you pay the interest turns into $350 million, however, a lot, right? But here's the problem. Wall Street doesn't like these deals anymore because so many hotels have underperformed. And no longer will they allow you to just pledge the revenue from the hotel to pay off the loan. They want you to have some serious skin in the game. So they want a dedicated funding source. They want 150% generally of the amount of money it would take to pay off that loan committed to the revenue bond. So they want something that's predictable, that's tangible, that's substantial. They want your parking garage revenue or your car rental revenue or your general fund, your budget, the budget that we rely on to pay for your neighborhood parks and our transit and our police and our fire and all the services, street repair. They want that something pledged as collateral in addition to the revenue. So if this hotel underperforms, if this hotel underperforms, if during some 10, 15, 20-year period, the country goes through a deep, deep recession, or more than one recession, or a depression, and the hotel massively underperforms, we're on the hook for it. We're on the hook for it. And if we all decide that that's the pathway we want to go to, fine, then let's do that. But when do we have the conversation about the risk? Because we're just going along and nobody's even asked. We certainly didn't have it before the MAPS 3 vote. None of this was talked about. 2.5 minutes that Mick Cornett talks about this package, right? So as we're going along, again, and let me just share with you like the experience of my first month, right? Because in so many ways it shapes my first week, before my first meeting, we're going to create this nonprofit. It's called the Alliance for Economic Development. And I sit down with the city manager and he explains to me that it's very important to have a nonprofit like the Alliance for Economic Development because we need a vehicle to do things like have studies, like on a convention center hotel. And if the results are not favorable, the study can rest with the nonprofit and not be released to the public, right? This is not something that anybody would say to me today, but he didn't know me yet, and so he shared that with me the first time we met. Then I meet with 2 different journalists at the Oklahoman, and I have coffee with them, and I'm meeting with them separately. And both of them say, we're leaving the field of journalism. We're burned out. We're burned out not just of journalism in general and the Oklahoman in particular. And when we were covering the MAPS 3 campaign, we tried to bring these issues to the public. We tried to let the public know about these issues, and our editors killed the stories. Would not allow these stories to be heard by the public. Of course, at that time, around the time that they're hiring Mick Cornett to be the vice president at Ackerman McQueen, you have David Thompson assuming the presidency of the Chamber of Commerce. He's also now going to be head of the MAPS 3 campaign. Thank you, sir. And then he's publisher of the Oklahoman. He's all 3 wrapped into one person, right? And so the editors at the Oklahoman kill these stories and do not allow the public to hear this information. And both of these gentlemen tell me, if this our opinion, they certainly couldn't know, but their opinion was, Ed, we feel like if these stories had gotten out, MAPS 3 would not have passed. And it was as if they kicked me in the gut, right? I'm hearing this and I'm thinking, that really goes to a legitimacy question. If the public, I mean, we like to say that the public voted on something, but if the public doesn't have all the information, if information is withheld from the public, then you have a question of legitimacy. And that would go on at the Oklahoma and other stories that were killed. And I think that we all intuitively know that that's gone on over the decades. But that's a specific example that's happening now. And so we've gone along, and we chose very early in the process where we were going to put the convention center. And they directed it towards the most expensive, prized piece of real estate in the entire city. 10.5 acres just south of the Myria Gardens, just to the west of the Chesapeake Arena, owned by Fred Hall and Bob Moore. Very, very expensive, prized piece of real estate. And by putting the convention center on the most expensive piece of real estate in the city, you can't do it the way many cities do, where they have 3 sides can be aesthetically pleasing, but the back you don't really care about because it's up against a highway or something, so you have all your loading docks. Here, because you're putting it between 2 parks, all 4 sides have to be really nice. And so you've got to go underground. You've got to have your loading docks build ramps to go underground. And now you're increasing the cost of the convention center, right? So one question that we might ask ourselves is, we've known for about 3 years where we're going to put the convention center. We have the money in the bank, right? It's just collecting interest, not very much because interest rates are so low, but the money's in the bank. We knew where we want to put it, why haven't we bought the land? Right? We've budgeted $17.8 million for land acquisition and site prep. So let's do it. Except there's a problem that they're not telling you about. Is that the gentlemen who own that land think it's worth a whole lot more than we think it's worth. Right? And they're not answering our offers. Right? Or privately they're telling us numbers that are tens of millions of dollars more than we've budgeted for it. And at the same time, we're learning that there's electrical lines underneath Harvey Avenue, which we didn't know about. Which, when you start talking about site prep, means that it's going to cost a whole lot more to do the site prep than we thought. So now we have two problems that are not being discussed publicly. One is that you may have a massive shortfall in your budget for land acquisition and site prep. The second is that even before you get into that perhaps tens of millions of dollars of shortfall, and let me also add that what they're trying to do is also buy the land to the west of that 10.5 acres for the Phase 2 expansion. They're trying to use MAPS 3 dollars to buy money for the Phase 2 expansion, which will come at us later, and which, is, again, is outlined in this report that they won't let you see, this blueprint. So that's the first problem, is that you may have a tens of millions of dollars of shortfall. The second problem is, even before we get into cost overruns, even before we get into that land acquisition shortfall, the consultants are saying you don't have enough money to build the 285,000 square feet that the study recommended you needed in Phase 1. So we're looking at dozens of thousands of feet smaller convention center than we were promised, and that Nick Cornett is somehow using to say we're going to impact. It's not going to be as big. It's shrinking. It's a shrinking convention center. Where's one place that you might make up the difference? If your convention center is shrinking, where might you make up the difference? You might make up the difference in the hotel, which again is a hybrid between a convention center and a hotel. If the bottom part is basically like a convention center, you might try and build a bigger hotel and have more meeting room space, 50,000 square feet or more of meeting room space in the hotel, which happens to coincide with us going along for 4 years and hearing about a 650 room hotel, and then all of a sudden, now we're talking about a 735 room hotel, a bigger hotel, with no explanation really as to why anybody thought we should build a significantly bigger hotel. So what we're being prepped for privately, what we do, we meet in groups of 4. There's 9 of us, right? So we can't meet in groups of 5 or more because that would violate the Open Meetings Act. So what we do is we meet in groups of 4 so that we can circumvent the Open Meetings Act. And we have the consultants and everybody come talk to us in groups of 4, and then the 4 of us meet and exchange ideas, and then you have another 4 that meet and exchange ideas, and the idea that the people that are in both rooms are not talking is somewhat ludicrous. But that's what we do. And so what we're being prepped for privately is that it's going to require massive subsidies, and that some kind of pledging of dedicated funding is going to be required. And we're just moving along, right? And we had 2 studies on the hotel, which were commissioned by this nonprofit, the Alliance for Economic Development. We have to be the only city in America who now has 3 studies, none of which have been commissioned by the city itself. They're all commissioned by the chamber or a nonprofit. And a gentleman gets up and he gives all kinds of projections about how a hotel would perform, which is completely dependent on how the convention center would perform. And you would need the study and that to plug into this study, but nobody has this study. So you can't make sense of this convention center hotel study. And nobody's asking questions of the council. And 6 members of the council finally, state that they've never read the Convention Sports and Leisure study from 4 years ago. And so at that point where it looks like there's just this inertia, and somebody has decided the outcome long ago, and we're just actors on a play, but the concluding act has already been written, and we're just moving towards the final act, at some point, it begs the question, can and should decision-making power be removed from that governing body and brought back to the people? And I would argue that it should. That this is a textbook case of exactly when power should be dispersed back to the people. To check back in with them. To force the public disclosure and transparency of all this information and let the public digest it. Now, if you have a referendum and you've got, now the media will, it may not be completely forthcoming, but at least you'll have some stories and you'll have some debate. And with social media increasingly replacing the hegemony of the Oklahoman, you'll get more and more fruitful discussion. And so we'll get this information out and let the people decide. The referendum is not necessarily for or against a convention center. It's about this particular complex, and it's about letting the people decide, checking back in with the people, confirming that the people really do want to go forward with this plan and with the risk that it entails. And I think that is absolutely appropriate. And I think that a petition in that sense is about something much larger than a convention center or a convention center complex. It's about boundary setting. It's about boundary setting with that small concentrated power that says you must be transparent. You must share all this information with the public for future initiatives, for future projects. You cannot behave in this manner, because if you do, power can be dispersed and given to the people. Just because you have 5 votes on the council does not mean that you can do whatever project you deem in the best interests of the city, whether it's urban renewal or building a convention center complex, which is hundreds of millions of dollars, potentially more than was promised to the people. And so, in that sense, the petition is about much more than a convention center. I would, I've gone on quite a while, and so maybe, maybe Q&A now. Yeah.
Anybody has questions, if you'll please come over to this mic.
I applaud you for the research that you've done and the watchdog you're being. I don't care if you're a Democrat or a liberal or whatever. I applaud anyone who asks questions. I'm sitting here listening to this and I'm going, oh my goodness, how the heck did we get out of Dodge? We don't want any part of this. And it's so easy for me to see clearly, because for me, it's not government's business. They have no business investing our money in a for-profit enterprise, ever, anywhere, anytime, period. Why do we even have to prove to the people that it's a sinking ship when the government should never own the ship?
Right.
So I want to get your take on that. On what do you think is the proper role of government? Do they even have any business building a convention center, even if it were to be profitable? What is your view on that question?
I don't believe that government has business owning a hotel and competing against the private sector, scared to death that if the hotel doesn't perform, that money could then come out of our general fund, which then makes us compete with the private sector, small business owners who own hotels downtown, other private entities that own hotel. We will be in direct competition with the private sector, trying to do everything we can, maybe in a depressed economy, to get everybody to stay at this hotel. We have other issues that we need to focus our limited time and attention on. It is not ownership or massive private subsidies. When the private sector wouldn't touch this with a 10-foot pole, that should be a big, big red flag for us.
So I think there's 2 reasons that it's wrong. One is we all don't need to collectively compete against individual members of our society. That's what you're explaining. That makes it wrong. And secondly, government is there just to protect everybody from each other and create as even of a playing field as they can. They're not in the business to be in business. And the free market has always been the best indicator of what's going to be successful. If you want to know what the odds of anything of success are, go to Vegas, where people put real money and skin in the game.
Right.
So like you say, if no private investor is going to do this, it's a bad idea. So it's a wrong idea to do it, and it's a bad idea to do it. And I think both parts of that need to be trumpeted in your campaign because if you want to get ideologues like us on board, say it's wrong, and we're behind you, as well as it doesn't make sense. So thanks for being here.
It's wrong, and it doesn't make sense.
Thank you, Dr. Machine, for what's your last?
Shadid.
Shaveen, I'm sorry. Thank you for what you're doing. I agree with your transparency idea very much. My name is Jerome, and I heard you talking about power, and there was a guy by the name of Lord Acton one time who stated that power tends to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. So what you're saying tends to be the case, what's going on in our city. Having said that, I would like to hit a subject called ICLEI, the acronym for ICLEI. I have studied quite a considerable amount about the United Nations ICLEI project and their MO, mode of operations, and some of the things that they're doing in big cities, and I've got a lot of information on that. So I'm going to ask you a question, a two-part question, sir. A, is Oklahoma City part of ICLEI? Meaning, do they pay dues to contribute to, be part of this consortium of public-private partnership, fascistic monopoly? Are they involved with ICLEI? A.
Is the city of Oklahoma City?
It's called Sustainable Development. Do they pay dues to ICLEI?
I don't know. If we
You don't know? Okay, sir. That tends to be the annoying going on. A lot of people say, gee, I never even heard of it. I don't even know about it. So the net effect is equal to this. ICLEI is called Stack 'em and Pack 'em. And if it looks like a skunk and smells like a skunk, it probably is. So there tends to be the tendency in Oklahoma City. There's a school being built right now just south of the Character First Center, A. There is a lot of development in apartment buildings. So therefore people are going to move into the city, live into the city, and have schools. And that's the whole idea with the United Nations, ICLEI, to stack them and pack them. And the city with all of the stuff, it really looks like United Nations ICLEI projects. And people say, gee, I never heard. I think it would be something to really invest, sir.
The city,
Look into.
Let me address, because I know that as mayor, I could not care less what the United Nations thinks that we should do in Oklahoma City. And would not, our planning department is anything but, our planning director is leaving this week. 5 planners have left. Our planning department is decimated. There is no, we are trying to do a plan, which we haven't done in decades. I do want to differentiate. I do think that fiscal conservatism, fiscal responsibility dictates having a plan. Just like any company, military, our families, we all have to have a plan. And there is risk in Oklahoma City's expansion. You've got to have a plan of how you're going to continue to provide services: police, fire, sewage, water. 84,000 potholes a year and climbing. How are you going to maintain what you've already built? So how many more streets can you afford to build? How much more, new areas of the city can you develop and be able to provide police and fire? I want us, and I acknowledge and respect your concern about those organizations, but I don't want them tied just to the idea that if we have a plan, that's necessarily somebody from the United Nations dictating that, because fiscal conservatism dictates that we take an inventory of how much it will cost to maintain what we've already built, and then come up with a plan for how much more you can build in the 10, 20 years to come. And I think that you do that inventory and you figure out a number, develop around, this is where we can afford to put the streets, police and fire. Everybody develop to your heart's content around it. But that's what we can afford, and we can't do any more. Because I don't know that we can afford what we've already built. And so we must not be afraid of having a plan. Thank you.
John.
Yes, sir.
John Wolford, thank you for coming to speak for us today.
Get closer to the mic, please.
My concern is the streetcar. That just seems like an idea from outer space. You just put new streets in. It's a very limited route which can't be changed once you start it. It's going to cost $138 million for such a small route. You can buy streetcars that look like buses that look like streetcars, similar. Something like that, rather than spend all that money for nothing. What do you think?
I have had serious reservations. I've been very outspoken. I've raised as many questions as I can. I've brought in a national speaker. I've done a town hall meeting with 500 people. I've done everything I can to raise questions about that project. I don't like that we have not asked the developers and property owners along that loop to pay for any of the operations, like is done in so many other cities. I don't like the route. I don't like the idea of a loop. I think that if you're going to do something like that, you connect it to a major employment center like the Health Science Center. I don't understand the current route. I'm in a minority on the council. The majority of the council doesn't agree with me. And so, we're moving forward. But I have serious reservations. Not just about that, but about we cannot continue to build things and not have money for the operations. You're building a 1 mile long park downtown surrounded by vacant and abandoned buildings that's going to cost you millions of dollars a year, and you don't have a plan for how to pay for it. It's a mile long. It's going to have grass field. How are you going to you're going to water that in August? I mean, how are you going to pay for that and not take money away from our neighborhood parks? $3 million a year for the streetcar. This study says millions and millions a year more for the convention center. There's no plan. And then that study, which was recently updated by our police chief, says, we're 200 officers short. That would be about $17 million a year. We're looking at major operational liabilities and deficits with no plan. When you have this conversation in the back rooms with the department chairs, how are we going to pay for this? Everybody's looking down at the floor. And it's very obvious that there is no plan. And we just can't do that anymore. It's a lot more fun to cut ribbons than to make your monthly payment.
Thank you.
Thank you for your effort trying to stop this action. I'm not a resident of Oklahoma City, so I don't think I have any financial problems with it, unless there's a state funding involved. Do you know if that's the case?
No, sir, I don't anticipate state funding for the convention center.
It's strictly being financed by the city?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Doctor, thank you, appreciate it. I do have a question for you, and that is the whole idea of transparency. If elected mayor, all right, would you go along with the idea of ensuring that a transparent mechanism was significantly in place before going along with the expansion or development or implementation of new large projects, or even a continuation of existing large projects to a reasonable market? What do you think?
I would do everything I could. Everything I knew, I would search for ways to do it. I think that you've got to get the public more involved through social media, seek the public's opinion, not just have meetings where we're going through the motions and we listen to what the public says and then we do what we're going to do anyway. I think that these projects have to be vetted much better before we bring them to the public. There was a sales tax in St. Louis where they wanted to improve their fire stations. They did an inventory of all their fire stations, got cost estimates, took it to a vote of the people, and then did it, and the cost came in pretty much what they thought based on the studies ahead of time. And not everybody was happy, but the majority were. And so I think that there's no reason why you can't do all these studies and vetting ahead of time. Instead of just saying in concept, we're going to build 4 senior wellness centers. And then figuring out afterwards, there really isn't a partner who's willing to partner with you and pay this subsidy and then trying to figure it out. Or we want to do 75 miles of sidewalks and then figuring out that you can only afford half of that. Or same with half of the amount of trails. Or, why not do all the study ahead of time and then bring it to a vote of the people? But in terms of transparency, that would be the most important thing to me, is never outsourcing studies to any entity that then wouldn't be accessible through the Open Records Act. That would never be acceptable.
Allow me to rephrase my question.
Okay.
If elected mayor, does the mayor have the authority, and if so, would you be willing to execute it, to not, even if a project's approved, not implement it until such transparency has occurred?
Okay, so we have a weak mayor, we have a council manager form of government, which means that as mayor, you really only have this, I wouldn't have any more voting power than I do today as councilman, just 1 out of 9 votes. But the mayor is the spokesperson for these projects. The mayor has access to a lot of the information that the council, in this case, didn't. And so you've got to have a mayor who's going to share all of this information with the public, who would never withhold any of it from the public. And I absolutely commit to you that I will do that.
These are the last 2 questioners here.
Hi, my understanding is that you have a petition to stop the building of the convention center. How did you get the petition started? What is the process? And can we take that process and apply it to stopping the streetcar?
There's a group of people who started an initiative petition on term limits at the city level. We have them at the state, but not at the city level. And they have done a lot of the legal research. What you have to do for an initiative petition in the city of Oklahoma City is you have to collect 25% of the number of people who voted in the last citywide election. So the last citywide election was the 2010 mayor's election, in which 24,000 people voted. So 25% of that number is 6,000 signatures. And so for both the term limits, convention center, any referendum, you would need 6,000 signatures. Now the next citywide election is going to be the mayor's race on March 4th. And that number is going to be substantially higher. So on March 4th, you'll still be able to do a referendum on anything, but you would need 25% of the number of people who vote on March 4th. And so, yeah.
I like we are against the overreach of the federal government. I also don't like our press when we don't have freedom of the press because these warlords that are over it. And I would like to see more push to that alternate media, in other words, the internet. I know that in Baltimore they have WiMAX, and it covers over 80% of the city. I'm not for Baltimore, but
What is WiMAX?
it's a super Wi-Fi.
Okay.
It means they literally
Yeah, don't go into detail.
Yeah.
Get to a question here.
That's what I'm asking is, that was one of the other candidates for mayor previously, was for bike trails, walking trails, and for Wi-Fi over the city. But I guess that he didn't get elected and go over big. But I think it should go over big in light of the fact that our news media, the Oklahoman, is controlled, and I don't like control. I like to have more input from the public.
Thank you, sir. I'm very grateful for your time.
I do want everybody to know that I have talked with David Holt, who's the campaign manager, State Senator Holt, campaign manager for Mick Cornett, and I'm doing all I can to get him here. He deserves a chance to come here and give his side of the story. There's been some pretty strong allegations toward him today, and he needs that opportunity to answer that. So I've suggested any Wednesday in February. You just name it. We need to name it as soon as possible, because as we get along a little closer, I've got to start filling those dates up. But we do want Mayor Cornett here because there's been a lot of good things that have happened in Oklahoma City. And he's been mayor for a long time, and he may have a different side of this story. And I think it's important that we hear from the sources each side of the story. And so anyway, folks, I thank you for coming. Next week, again, we will have U.S. Representative James Langford here, and that should be a very interesting meeting. Hope to see you back next week. Thank you.